Welcome to Daily Dreamer, the podcast that provides practical tips and insights to help you reach your biggest dreams. Tune in for daily doses of motivation, inspiration, and actionable advice to turn your aspirations into reality. Whether you're looking to find clarity, boost your confidence, or stay on track with your goals, Daily Dreamer is here to guide you every step of the way.
Okay, ready to dive in. Today, we're exploring the world, according to Andrew Tate.
Yeah, using excerpts from a recent interview he gave.
Should be pretty interesting.
Definitely. Lots to unpack there.
For those who might not know, just a quick intro, Tate's a former kickboxer.
Right.
Turned internet personality, known for, well, let's just say, his strong opinions.
He's not afraid to ruffle some feathers, that's for sure.
He definitely does not hold back.
And what I find really fascinating about Tate is how he connects all these different things.
Yeah.
Geopolitics, AI, social commentary, especially on men and women.
It's a mix that you don't see every day.
Right, and he weaves this narrative that's meant to really make you think, challenge what you might assume.
Yeah, you could say he's not a fan of conventional wisdom.
Not at all.
One of the big things that stands out right away is his view on the future of the West. He's pretty convinced that Western civilization is in decline.
Yeah, and that's a topic that comes up a lot these days.
But instead of blaming it on the usual suspects, like economics or politics, he points the finger at something much more, let's say, controversial.
Yeah, he goes in a different direction.
He really does.
So what does he see as the root of the problem?
He thinks the West's emphasis on individualism, on pursuing your own goals above all else, that's actually a weakness.
Interesting.
Especially when you compare it to cultures that are more collectivist, like China, for example.
So he's saying that focusing on personal goals and material wealth can actually harm society as a whole.
That's exactly what he's arguing.
It's a thought-provoking idea, that's for sure.
And he takes it even further. He connects this decline, this perceived decline of the West, to the choices that women are making. He says that women focusing on careers and material possessions instead of family, that is actively harming society.
Wow, that's definitely going to spark some debate.
It's a very controversial stance, to say the least.
It is, and his critics would say that it's a very simplistic view.
Right.
Ignores all the other factors that contribute to these big societal shifts.
Sure.
And that, of course, blaming it mainly on women's choices is inherently misogynistic.
There are definitely a lot of different ways to look at it.
For sure.
But moving on, he also talks quite a bit about artificial intelligence, AI.
Yeah, that's a huge topic these days.
And this is where he brings up a term that's both interesting and kind of unsettling.
Okay.
The useless eater.
The useless eater?
Yeah, he paints this picture of the future where AI leads to mass unemployment. And this creates a whole segment of society that basically becomes redundant.
So people who are no longer needed in an AI-driven economy.
Exactly.
It's a scary thought.
It is. And it's not just fear-mongering either.
Right, because a lot of experts are predicting that AI could disrupt the job market in a big way.
Absolutely.
It could lead to a lot of people losing their jobs as more tasks become automated.
And some people are even talking about things like universal basic income.
UBI, yeah, to provide a safety net for people who are displaced by automation.
Or maybe we need to completely rethink how we train people for the jobs of the future.
Definitely something to consider.
So it's not all doom and gloom, right?
I hope not.
But it does raise some serious questions about how AI is going to reshape the world of work.
Big questions.
And does Tate offer any solutions to these challenges, or is he just highlighting the problem?
Well, he argues that understanding AI is crucial, like really getting a grasp of what it can do and how it's going to change things.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes the importance of achieving financial independence.
So not being reliant on a traditional job.
Right, because those jobs might not be there in the future.
Interesting.
He's really stressing the need to take action now, to acquire the skills and the resources you need to thrive in a world that's becoming increasingly dominated by technology.
So instead of passively waiting for the AI wave to crash, he's saying, get on your surfboard and learn to ride it.
Exactly.
It's interesting how he connects this idea of being proactive to his own unconventional path to wealth.
Right. He often talks about his experience building an online webcam business.
Yeah, that's become a big part of his story.
He sees it as an example of how you can seize an opportunity and achieve financial success outside of the traditional career paths.
And he even claims that AI presents an even bigger opportunity for wealth creation than cryptocurrency did.
Which is a pretty bold statement coming from someone who, as many know, accurately predicted Bitcoin's rise.
Way back when.
Right.
But beyond just making money, he's constantly hammering on this idea of personal responsibility. And this is where some of his arguments get really complex.
Okay, how so?
He believes, very strongly, that individuals should own their choices, accept the consequences.
Good or bad?
Good or bad, yeah, no excuses.
It's a tough stance.
It is. And he criticizes what he sees as a culture of blame shifting.
Interesting.
Especially among women, which ties back to his earlier points about their role in societal decline.
Right, that connection is there.
And he even applies this idea of personal responsibility when he's talking about the criticism he's received for his past business ventures.
Like the webcam business.
Exactly.
And how does he address that?
He argues that people who consume pornography are actually complicit in the industry they might be condemning.
It's like he's turning the mirror back on his critics.
Exactly.
And saying, look at your own role in this.
Yeah, it's a very thought-provoking argument.
It is. It makes you consider where personal responsibility begins and ends.
Right, and whether individuals are solely responsible for their choices within systems or industries that might be exploitative.
Right. Those are big questions.
They are.
Lots to unpack there.
Another fascinating point he brings up is this comparison he makes between the relationship he had with his boxing trainer and the traditional dynamic between men and women.
Okay, so he's using this analogy to illustrate something.
Yeah, he's using it to explain his belief that responsibility and authority have to go hand in hand.
They need to exist together.
Exactly.
Interesting.
He's saying that for individuals to be truly responsible, they need to have a corresponding level of authority.
To make those decisions, to face those consequences.
Right. And this is where he applies that concept to his views on the sex industry, which are often quite controversial.
Right. And how does that connection work?
Well, he suggests that if women are truly going to be considered fully autonomous, then they also need to be held accountable for the choices they make within that realm.
Within the sex industry.
Yes. It's a very complex issue, and it's definitely one that sparks a lot of debate.
It is. And it ties into this broader conversation about freedom of choice and accountability.
Right. And what happens when those two things clash?
When you have the freedom to make a choice, but you're also responsible for the consequences of that choice.
It's something we're grappling with as a society right now.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting that while Tate is so adamant about this idea of personal responsibility, he also acknowledges that he's evolved as a person.
He's not stuck in the past.
He's not. He admits to making mistakes, and he emphasizes the importance of learning from those mistakes.
So he's open to growth and change.
He is. He attributes his success to his willingness to take risks, to seize opportunities, even when those opportunities were unconventional or controversial.
So he's not afraid to go against the grain.
Not at all.
And it seems like he's saying that it's okay to be wrong sometimes, as long as you learn from it and keep moving forward.
Exactly.
It's a very pragmatic approach.
It is, and it's one that might resonate with people who admire his entrepreneurial spirit.
Right. This idea of never giving up, always striving to be better.
But this wouldn't be a deep dive on Andrew Tate.
Right.
Without touching on some of his more, let's say, colorful statements.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
For example, he talks about how he rarely cries.
Really cries.
Yeah, and he links this to his focus on competency rather than emotions.
So he sees emotions as a weakness.
Not necessarily, but he definitely prioritizes a more stoic and pragmatic approach to life.
Action over feelings.
Action over feelings, yeah, that seems to be his motto.
It's a very distinct worldview.
It is.
And it's one that's sure to provoke strong reactions.
It always does.
So what does the future look like through Andrew Tate's eyes?
Well, he does offer some predictions, and they're just as thought-provoking and controversial as his other views.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
For instance, he predicts that there's going to be a big shift in global power dynamics.
Okay.
He believes that the Middle East is going to become a major hub of wealth and influence.
The Middle East?
Yeah, he sees it as a place that's going to attract entrepreneurs and investors.
Interesting.
With promises of safety and zero taxes.
Wow, that's a bold prediction.
It is, especially given the current geopolitical landscape.
It's a very different picture than what we often hear.
Right, and he also has some thoughts about the future of America, particularly in relation to Donald Trump.
Okay, that's always a hot topic.
It is, and he expresses cautious optimism about America's future under Trump. He sees him as a figure who could potentially inspire a resurgence of masculinity and traditional values.
So he sees Trump as a symbol of something larger.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how he connects these different ideas.
Yeah, he's good at that.
He is, but he's not blindly optimistic about everything.
No, he also expresses concerns about the potential dangers of unchecked power, even when it's in the hands of someone he admires, like Elon Musk.
Okay, so even people he respects, he's still wary of too much power.
Right. He acknowledges that Musk is playing a huge role in the technological race with China.
Yeah, especially in areas like AI and space exploration.
But he also warns about what could happen if too much power is concentrated in the hands of a single individual.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is, and it connects back to his earlier point about the potential for large segments of society to become economically obsolete because of AI.
Right, the useless eaters.
Yeah, and he paints a pretty bleak picture of government, which he views as inherently uncaring, having little use for the unemployed masses.
It's a chilling thought.
It is, and it raises some really critical questions for all of us.
Like what?
Like, what skills and knowledge are going to be truly valuable in an AI-dominated future?
Yeah.
Are we preparing ourselves for that kind of shift?
Those are big questions. Definitely something to think about.
Absolutely.
It's a lot to digest.
It is, and we're just getting started.
Okay, I'm ready for more.
Good, because next we're going to dive into Tate's perspective on a very contentious subject.
Okay.
The war in Ukraine.
I'm sure he has some strong opinions on that as well.
He definitely does.
Let's hear it. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, Tate doesn't see it as just an isolated event. He sees it as part of a bigger power struggle between the West and Russia.
So he's putting it into a larger geopolitical context.
Exactly. And he's very critical of what he sees as the West's willingness to escalate the conflict.
To get more involved.
Yeah, especially considering the risks of a wider war.
Right, the potential for things to spiral out of control.
That's his concern. And he argues that no one in America or the UK actually wants to risk a full-blown war with Russia.
So he's saying there's a disconnect between the actions of Western governments and the desires of their citizens.
That's his argument, and this is where he brings it back to his ideas about men and women.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says that Western leaders are too focused on appeasing what he sees as an overly emotional and pacifistic public.
So basically he's saying that they're letting emotions cloud their judgment?
Right, and he believes this perceived weakness
of the West.
Yeah, this hesitancy to act decisively is actually emboldening Russia and other adversaries.
So he's advocating for a more assertive approach.
Yeah, show strength.
And he even draws a comparison between Western leaders and those in China.
Interesting.
Arguing that the Chinese prioritize the collective good over individual emotions.
So he sees a difference in leadership style.
Yeah, and he sees that difference as a potential vulnerability for the West.
It's all part of his broader argument that societies with strong, decisive male leadership are better equipped to handle these complex geopolitical situations.
So strength and decisiveness are key, in his view.
Absolutely, and this is where he connects the Ukraine conflict to another hot-button issue.
Which is?
Immigration.
Okay, how does he make that connection?
He argues that the influx of immigrants into Western countries is a direct result of declining birth rates among native populations.
So he's linking immigration to demographics.
Exactly, and of course he blames this decline, as we talked about earlier, on the choices women are making.
Right, prioritizing careers and material possessions over having children.
That's his argument, and he uses this term population replacement to describe what he sees happening.
Can you unpack that term a bit more for our listener?
Sure. The term population replacement often refers to the belief that there's a deliberate effort to replace one population group with another, usually through immigration or demographic shifts.
So it's about changing the makeup of a society.
Yeah, it's a concept that often comes up in discussions about immigration, cultural change, and national identity.
And it can be quite controversial.
It definitely is, and it's important to note that many scholars and demographers consider this theory to be a fear-mongering tactic with little basis in reality.
Okay, so there's debate about how real this phenomenon actually is.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue.
And Tate doesn't shy away from using inflammatory language when discussing these things.
Right, he's not afraid to stir the pot.
He even uses the term cucked to describe Western men.
Okay, can you clarify that term for our listeners?
Sure. The term cuck is an insult derived from the term cuckold.
Which means?
Which refers to a man whose wife is unfaithful to him.
Okay.
And in this context, it's used to suggest that Western men are being dominated and controlled by their women.
So it's implying a loss of power or masculinity.
Exactly. It's a very derogatory and misogynistic term.
Right.
That reinforces harmful stereotypes about men and women.
It's definitely not a term we endorse.
Absolutely not. But it's important to understand the language he's using.
And understand his perspective.
Yeah, and how he views the world.
So, to sum up his viewpoint on this, he seems to be saying that Western societies are on a path of self-destruction.
A very bleak outlook.
Yeah. Driven by declining birth rates, mass immigration, and this perceived weakening of traditional masculinity.
He sees all these things as interconnected.
Exactly. And he paints a pretty dark picture of Western civilization losing its dominance on the world stage.
Being replaced by more assertive and collectivist cultures.
Right. And he sees this as a direct consequence of the decline of traditional gender roles and the rise of what he perceives as a weak, feminized culture.
It's certainly a stark and controversial worldview.
It is, and it's one that's likely to generate a lot of debate.
But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Tate's personal life.
Okay.
He's been through a lot in recent years, including a very public arrest and ongoing legal battles.
Right, that's been all over the news.
It has, and he talks about these experiences in the interview. And it's fascinating to hear how he frames them.
So how does he talk about his time in jail?
He actually describes it as a fantastic holiday with his brother.
Wow, a fantastic holiday.
Yeah, that's his word choice.
That's not the typical reaction you hear from someone who's been incarcerated.
Right, but he seems to have adopted a very stoic attitude toward his legal troubles.
Like he's not letting it get to him?
Exactly. He claims to be emotionally detached from the whole ordeal, saying that the outcome, whether he's convicted or acquitted, doesn't really matter to him.
That's a pretty remarkable perspective.
It is, and he even goes further, claiming that he made more money while under house arrest than he would have if he had been free to travel and pursue his usual business ventures.
So he's saying that being confined actually benefited him financially.
That's his claim, and it's difficult to verify if that's true.
Right.
But it does reinforce this image of him as someone who thrives on adversity.
Who sees opportunity even in challenging situations.
Exactly. He's always looking for the upside, even in the most difficult circumstances.
It's a very resilient mindset.
It is. And he makes another interesting point when he's discussing the financial losses he's incurred because of the legal case.
Yeah.
He estimates that he's lost around $200 million.
$200 million?
Yeah, in seized funds, assets that have been frozen, and missed business opportunities.
Wow. That's a huge amount of money.
It is, but instead of expressing bitterness or resentment about those losses, he frames them as calculated risks that he was willing to take.
So he's not dwelling on the negative.
He's not, and he emphasizes that he's still financially secure.
Like it's just a setback, not a defeat.
Right. It's almost like he's trying to convey this message that true wealth is about more than just money. That it's about mindset, about the ability to adapt and overcome obstacles.
A very philosophical approach to wealth.
It is, and it feeds into his broader message of self-reliance and resilience.
A message that's likely to resonate with people who admire his entrepreneurial spirit.
And his never-give-up attitude.
Right, he's a very determined individual.
He is, and he seems to suggest that material wealth can be fleeting.
But the ability to adapt, to overcome, to rebuild, those are the qualities that really matter.
The enduring assets. It's a very empowering message.
It is, and it's one that's closely aligned with his philosophy of personal power and self-mastery.
Right, this idea that you're in control of your own destiny.
Yeah, that you can create your own success no matter what obstacles you face.
Now, speaking of business, he mentions a few key ventures in this interview, including his online university, The Real World.
Yeah, that's become one of his flagship projects.
And his private network, The War Room.
Can you tell our listener more about those ventures?
Sure. He describes The Real World as a platform for teaching what he calls modern wealth creation methods. It focuses primarily on online business models.
Making money on the internet.
Yeah, especially those that leverage the power of social media and digital marketing.
He mentions 18 different ways to make money online.
Wow. Yeah, and he claims that the opportunities for wealth creation today are far greater than they were even a few years ago.
So he sees a lot of potential in the digital realm.
He does, and he contrasts this with traditional career paths.
Like working for a company, climbing the corporate ladder.
Right. And he argues that people who are clinging to those old models of employment are likely to be left behind in an increasingly automated and AI-driven world.
So he's advocating for adaptation, for embracing the new realities of the job market.
Exactly.
It's a perspective that's shared by a lot of futurists and economists.
Right. This idea that the nature of work is changing.
It's not your father's workplace anymore.
Not at all. And the question is, are traditional education systems and job training programs, are they keeping up with these changes?
Are they preparing people for the skills they'll need in the future?
That's the big question, and Tate seems to be suggesting that they're not.
So he's positioning himself as a guide.
Yeah, as someone who can help people navigate this new economic landscape.
Interesting. And what about the war room?
What is that all about?
Well, he describes the war room as a more exclusive community.
Okay.
For people who are serious about achieving financial success.
The elite.
In a sense, yeah, he portrays it as a network of like-minded individuals who share strategies, support each other, and hold each other accountable on their entrepreneurial journeys.
So it's about community and accountability.
Yeah, a kind of mastermind group for aspiring entrepreneurs.
And the name itself, the War Room, is very evocative.
It is. It suggests a sense of urgency, of competition.
Like you're in a battle for financial success.
Exactly. It reinforces this idea that we're living in a time of great economic upheaval.
And that those who aren't prepared to fight for their share
are going to be left behind.
It's a powerful message.
It is, and it taps into people's anxieties about financial security.
Right, the fear of being left behind in a world that's changing so rapidly.
It's a very real fear for a lot of people.
But beyond the specifics of his businesses, there's a broader philosophy that underpins everything Tate does.
And what would you say that is?
This idea of personal power. And the importance of developing a strong masculine mindset.
Okay, so it's about more than just making money.
It is. It's about becoming the best version of yourself.
In his view, what does that look like?
Well, he talks a lot about the need for men to reclaim their traditional roles as providers and protectors.
Okay.
And he argues that this requires a level of discipline, self-control, and assertiveness.
Qualities that he feels are often lacking in modern society.
Exactly. He's very critical of what he sees as the feminization of men, arguing that it's led to a generation of weak, indecisive individuals.
Who are easily manipulated and controlled.
Right. He really emphasizes the importance of physical strength, mental toughness, and the ability to face challenges head-on.
It's a very traditional, and some would argue, outdated view of masculinity.
It is, and some critics would say that it reinforces harmful stereotypes.
And ignores the complexities of gender identity and expression in the 21st century.
Right. There's a lot to unpack there.
There is, but it's important to understand where he's coming from.
To see the world through his lens, even if you don't agree with his perspective.
Exactly, because whether you love him or hate him,
right,
you can't deny that he's a force to be reckoned with.
He's made a huge impact, and he's not going away anytime soon.
He's a master at using social media to his advantage.
He knows how to get attention.
He does, and he's not afraid to court controversy or push boundaries.
And it's clearly working for him.
Millions of followers.
Yeah, he has a huge audience, and a lot of them are young men
who feel
disenfranchised or disillusioned with mainstream culture.
And they find his message empowering.
They do, and that brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of Tate's persona.
Which is?
His views on women.
That's been a major source of criticism.
It has, and it's important to acknowledge that his statements on this topic have been widely condemned as misogynistic and harmful.
So what are some of the things he said that have caused so much backlash?
Well, he's made some very inflammatory comments about women's roles in society.
Okay.
About their intelligence, their capacity for making sound decisions, and their overall value as human beings.
It's a very demeaning perspective.
It is, and he seems to view women primarily through the lens of their relationship to men.
So as wives, as daughters, as mothers.
Arguing that their primary purpose is to support and submit to their husbands or fathers.
It's a very traditional patriarchal view.
It is, and he's a staunch critic of feminism.
Okay.
Arguing that it's led to a decline in traditional values and a weakening of the family unit.
So he sees feminism as a negative force.
Yeah, and he has a lot to say about the sex industry as well.
Okay.
Expressing views that many find particularly disturbing.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, he openly discusses his past involvement in the webcam business.
Right.
And he makes some very provocative statements about the dynamics of power and consent within that industry.
Yeah. So what's his take on that?
He argues that women who choose to participate in the sex industry are fully responsible for their choices, meaning that they should be held accountable for any negative consequences that may arise.
So he's not acknowledging the potential for coercion or exploitation.
Right. He pushes back against the idea that women in the sex industry are often forced or taken advantage of. He argues that they're simply making rational choices based on their own desires and ambitions.
It's a very simplistic view of a very complex issue.
It is, and one that ignores the power dynamics that are often at play in the sex industry.
And the systemic factors that can contribute to women's involvement in this line of work.
Right, and many would argue that his perspective is deeply flawed and lacks empathy for the real experiences of women who are often marginalized and vulnerable within this industry.
It's a very sensitive topic and one that requires a lot of nuance and understanding.
Absolutely, and Tate's approach, at least on the surface, seems to be that true equality means holding everyone to the same standards.
Regardless of gender.
Regardless of gender, yeah. He believes that by shielding women from responsibility, society's actually doing them a disservice.
So he sees it as a form of paternalism.
Yeah, and he argues that true empowerment comes from owning your choices.
And facing the consequences.
Both positive and negative.
It's a very tough love approach.
And it is, and one that's not going to sit well with a lot of people.
But it's important to understand where he's coming from.
To see his logic, even if you disagree with his conclusions.
And in fairness to Tate, he has acknowledged that his views on women have evolved over time.
He's not static. He's willing to admit that he's made mistakes in the past.
And that he's committed to continuing to learn and grow.
So while his current views on women are undoubtedly controversial, he seems to be suggesting that his worldview is a work in progress.
That there's room for growth and change.
Exactly, and that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Because it suggests that he's not completely closed off to different perspectives.
Right, there's potential for dialogue and evolution.
And speaking of different perspectives, another aspect of Tate's philosophy that stands out is his emphasis on binary thinking.
Binary thinking?
Yeah, this idea that most issues in life can be boiled down to simple, either choices.
Right, black or white, no shades of gray.
Exactly. He rejects the idea of nuance or complexity. Arguing that it's often used as a way to avoid taking a stand or making a decision.
So he's all about decisiveness, about clarity.
Yeah, he sees the world in terms of winners and losers, good and evil, right and wrong.
A very black and white perspective.
It is, and he encourages his followers to adopt this same mindset.
Arguing
that it's the key to achieving success and dominating in all areas of life.
So it's about simplifying things, cutting through the noise.
Yeah, and focusing on what really matters.
It's a very stark and uncompromising worldview.
It is, but it can also be appealing to people who crave certainty and clear-cut answers.
Especially in a world that often feels chaotic and confusing.
Right. He offers a sense of order and clarity that can be comforting.
And that message can be very seductive, especially for young men who are still trying to figure out their place in the world.
Right, when you're feeling lost or uncertain.
A strong, decisive voice can be very appealing.
They can give you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose.
But there are also potential downsides to this type of thinking, right?
Definitely. Oversimplifying complex issues can lead to intolerance, prejudice, and a lack of empathy for people who hold different viewpoints.
So it's about finding a balance.
Exactly. Between having strong convictions and being open to challenging those convictions and considering alternative perspectives.
It's a delicate dance.
It is, and it's one that we all have to navigate.
So after spending all this time with Andrew Tate's ideas, what do you think our listener should take away from this deep dive?
I think the most important takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. Tate's views are often extreme and controversial, and it's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to them.
An emotional response.
Right, but it's important to step back and analyze his arguments objectively.
To think for yourself, basically.
Exactly, to engage with his ideas, even if you disagree with them.
And to see what resonates with you and what you reject.
Right, it's about becoming a more discerning consumer of information.
In a world that's overflowing with opinions and perspectives.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think Andrew Tate acts as a kind of mirror.
A mirror?
Yeah. He reflects back to us our own hopes and fears.
About the future.
About ourselves, about the world around us.
By engaging with his ideas.
Even the ones we find repulsive.
We can learn a lot about ourselves.
And the world we live in.
It's like he's holding up a magnifying glass to our own beliefs and values.
And forcing us to examine them more closely.
That's a powerful image.
It is. And in a world where technology is advancing at an unprecedented pace,
right,
where traditional values are being questioned, and where the future seems increasingly uncertain,
it feels like we're at a crossroads.
It does, and those are the kinds of conversations we need to be having.
About what kind of future we want to create.
And Andrew Tate, in his own provocative way, forces us to confront those big questions.
About how we define our own paths.
About how we create a life of meaning and purpose.
About what we're willing to fight for.
And perhaps the most important question of all, how do we engage in these difficult conversations?
About these challenging topics.
With respect, with empathy, and with a willingness to understand perspectives that are different from our own.
Those are the skills we need to cultivate.
To navigate this complex and ever-changing world.
Well said.
And we hope this deep dive
into the world, according to Andrew Tate,
has given you the tools and insights
to continue exploring these ideas.
And to engage in these conversations in a meaningful way.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. And we'll see you next time.
For another deep dive.
Well, we've spent a lot of time with Andrew Tate's ideas. And it's safe to say he's a
polarizing figure.
Yeah, to say the least.
Definitely inspires strong reactions, both positive and negative.
Love him or hate him.
People definitely have opinions.
You can't ignore him.
No, he's made too much of an impact.
He's not going away anytime soon.
That's for sure.
What stands out to you about his overall approach, especially for someone who might be hearing his ideas for the first time?
I think what really strikes me is how much he emphasizes personal growth.
Yeah.
Self-improvement.
This idea of constantly pushing yourself.
Yeah, to learn new skills, to overcome obstacles, to achieve your goals.
He's like a walking example of that growth mindset.
He really embodies it, doesn't he?
He does. It makes you wonder if that's part of what draws people to him.
I think it's definitely a factor.
This relentless drive to be better.
To be the best version of yourself.
It resonates with a lot of people, especially those who feel stuck.
Right, who feel like they're not living up to their potential.
And he's also incredibly savvy when it comes to self-promotion.
Oh yeah, he's a master of that.
He's built a huge platform for himself.
And he hasn't done it by shying away from controversy.
Not at all. He leans into it.
He understands the power of social media.
Yeah.
How to use it to his advantage.
To get people talking.
Yeah, he's a master storyteller. He knows how to craft a narrative that captures attention.
Whether you agree with him or not.
You can't deny that he's effective.
He gets his message out there.
He does.
And that leads me to another aspect of his personality that's hard to ignore.
What's that?
His charisma. His ability to persuade.
Yeah, he definitely has a way with words.
He does. He can articulate his ideas, even the most controversial ones,
right,
in a way that sounds clear and convincing.
He combines logic and emotion.
Yeah.
And he uses a lot of personal anecdotes, which makes his arguments very relatable.
And persuasive, especially to those who are already inclined to agree with him.
He knows how to connect with his audience.
He does, and he's also very confident.
Some might even say arrogant.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that.
But it seems to be part of his appeal.
It's like he's saying, this is what I believe, and I'm not afraid to say it.
And that can be refreshing, in a way.
Especially in a culture where people are often afraid to express strong opinions.
Or to challenge the status quo.
He's not afraid to be the villain.
And that resonates with some people.
Who feel like they're also going against the grain.
Who feel like they're not part of the mainstream.
Right. So after spending all this time with Andrew Tate's ideas, what do you think our listeners should take away from this deep dive?
I think the most crucial takeaway is the importance of critical thinking.
Of not just accepting what you hear at face value.
Exactly. Tate's views are often extreme and controversial.
And it's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction.
To get caught up in the emotion of it all.
But it's important to step back.
To analyze his arguments objectively.
To think for yourself.
Yeah, to engage with his ideas, even if you disagree with them.
To see what resonates with you and what you reject.
Right. To become a more discerning consumer of information.
In a world that's overflowing with opinions and perspectives.
And ultimately,
I
think Andrew Tate acts as a kind of mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah, he reflects back to us our own hopes and fears.
About the future, about ourselves.
About the world around us.
So by engaging with his ideas,
even the ones we find repulsive,
we can learn a lot about ourselves and the society we live in.
It's a way of understanding our own reactions.
Our own beliefs and values.
Yeah, and in a world where things are changing so rapidly.
With technology, with social norms, with everything.
It's more important than ever to be able to think critically.
To question assumptions, to challenge the status quo.
To engage in these difficult conversations.
With respect and empathy.
And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive.
To present Andrew Tate's worldview.
In a balanced and nuanced way.
To give you the tools to think for yourself.
To draw your own conclusions.
And to continue exploring these ideas on your own.
We hope you found it valuable.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.